Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. We're going to dive back into some Mitsi Studio today. A couple of weeks ago, they had a video that came out called Evolution of the Battleship. I thought that would be an interesting topic to take on, and they always have a very unique presentation style that I've come to appreciate. I'm going to pin in the comment section below a playlist of all of my previous reactions to Mitsi Studio's content, so you can see all of those things in one place. Got a couple of quick things I want to update you on since we haven't done this previously. Number one, there is a new tour available, and that is our hiking tour of Hadrian's Wall. We're going to be doing about a 60-mile stretch of Hadrian's Wall over the course of a week, and it's a very limited size tour. It's only open to 12 people, myself included, which unfortunately means that the cost is a little higher than I wanted it to be. So I realize that's going to limit it, but it's a really unique opportunity for 12 of us to have this cool experience next April. The link is in the description where you can book that. We've already booked 2 spots, and then you add myself. That means there's 9 left. If we don't book those pretty much fully in the next week or so, I'll probably have to cancel that tour because I have to put a deposit down up front on that one. And with the costs involved, I can't make it happen unless we fully book it. So if you want to do it, now's the time. We also still have 9 spots available for Jordan, which is coming in February. We have 7 people already on the waiting list for next summer's Scotland tour, which is fully sold out. So I may be looking to figure out where we can add a second one since that has been so popular. Before we dive into today's video, I want to thank all of the new folks who have signed up on Patreon. We've added quite a few new patrons in the last week or so after the popularity of a couple of my recent videos. And in particular, I want to say thank you to Kevin in Grass Lake, Michigan, up in the state up north. Thank you so much. He signed up as an executive producer patron. Kevin, you'll see your name at the end on the end screen. Thank you so much. Let's dive in.
Let us dive into the evolution of the battleships. You know, those massive gun-laden beasts of the sea built to blow other massive gun-laden beasts straight out of the water. These floating fortresses weren't just machines of war, they were symbols of national power and prestige.
I mean, the nearest thing I can compare it to, and we actually use the term arms race, is the nuclear arms race in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, right? This attempt by the superpowers of the day to outdo the other superpowers of the day through bigger, better, stronger, faster, more. And we had that, this naval arms race that exists throughout the centuries, but really escalates in the early part of the 20th century between the British and the Germans.
Projecting influence far beyond home shores. For example, when you are the world's biggest imperial asshole blasting the hell out of a bunch of helpless Asian and African chaps with cool-looking dreadnoughts. Did we kill them all, Henry? Splendid. Time for tea then.
Yeah, I'm fairly certain that while the British Empire did use naval power to spread its empire, it wasn't primarily used in that way. I get what they're trying to do, but the naval power, the reason they were able to spread the way they did was because of naval power, because of supply, because of projecting power, so to speak.
But before we get to the dreadnoughts and colonial gunboat diplomacy, let's rewind a bit. Our story begins long before turbines and turrets, back in the age of sail. From the 16th to the mid-19th century, the oceans were ruled not by engines, but by the wind.
And honestly, with any of these stories, you have to figure out a starting point, right? Because we know everything's connected. So no matter where you start, there's going to be somebody like me that's going to come along and say, no, you should have started and moved back farther. But, naval power has always been a part of war. And you can go back to the Roman Empire. What was the decisive battle that allowed Octavian, for example, the future Caesar Augustus, to win his civil war against Mark Antony and Cleopatra? It was a naval battle at Actium. Naval battles have always been a part of projecting power. Some of the most important battles that took place between the Persians and the Greeks involved naval combat.
Skilled seamen would read it, write it, not in a gay sense, and kill in its stillness. Naval battles were like a polite game of mutual destruction. Massive fleets would line up in neat rows and unleash full broadsides at each other, hoping to outblast the enemy who was basically doing the exact same thing.
I read somewhere, I think it was just today, I saw somebody, a historian that I follow, posted that one broadside from Lord Nelson's flagship, the HMS Victory, one broadside from his ship was a significant percentage of the entire firepower of the British Army at the Battle of Waterloo.
At some point, a brave and daring captain on the British ship HMS Victory was getting a bit bored by these traditional tactics and decided to go full Leroy Jenkins, steering his ships straight through the French and Spanish formations during the Battle of Trafalgar.
Yeah, I mean, if it had failed miserably, we'd be talking about what an idiot Nelson was for doing this. But because it was a success, because it resulted in his death during that battle, and because it really kind of sealed Napoleon's fate, if you think about it long term, we remember this as a great moment in naval history. But yeah, I mean, doing something that hadn't been done before, kind of shaking up the status quo, that gets remembered as foolish or brilliant.
The result, the British fleet destroyed 22 enemy ships while losing none of their own, teaching the French and Spanish sailor folks a lesson in how to make an enemy fleet your bitch. During the mid-19th century, the United States released a serious 186 2.0 patch on its navy. Wooden ships? Nerfed. Armor plating? OP as fuck.
So it's important to note that while we remember the battle at Hampton Roads in March of 1862 as the first battle between ironclads, which is true, CSS Virginia, often called the Merrimack. The reason we say Monitor and Merrimack more often than we say Monitor and Virginia is because the CSS Virginia was originally the USS Merrimack. It had been scuttled. The Confederates raised it, put armor plating on it, and renamed it the Virginia. It was the first battle between ironclads, but those were not the first ironclads. There were European powers that had built ironclads already. They just hadn't been used in combat.
With the US Civil War raging beyond the shorelines, the stage was set for a whole other type of naval warfare.
Yeah, and I mean, by the time you get to the end of the American Civil War, there are a lot of these ironclads. A lot of on the Brown Water Navy, which is the rivers. And then the Blue Water Navy, the ocean, less so, because a lot of the Union ironclads weren't really designed for that.
The Confederacy stormed in with the CSS Virginia.
Yep.
Full armor mode and apparently full sauna mode as well.
Very
Nothing
hot
too pleasant for those
inside.
sweaty Confederate boys inside. The Union answered with the USS Monitor. Tiny, low-key, but equipped with a full rotating turret for 360-degree multi-kills.
Yeah, so Monitor, they described it as a cheese box on a raft, is the way that people described it. Actually, most of the hull of the ship was actually underwater. It was mostly just the turret that you saw above the water.
Now, let's start the drums and get ready for an epic battle between these two ironclad behemoths.
Now, the day before, the Virginia had actually sailed out there and had hit and sunk American ships, damaged several. But the Monitor was already on its way. It's kind of fascinating when you think about it. The Confederates unleashed this monster ironclad on the wooden navy there in the Virginia Beach, Hampton Roads, Norfolk area, not knowing that the Union already has one on the way of its own.
And fire! Oh,
Pretty much.
That was a bit of a downer. We are truly sorry. Just not the getting your money back type of sorry. You bunch of e-wallets in a coma. It's not our fault armor-piercing shells were not invented yet. So, back to the ironclad warships. Wait a minute. It's already 1906 and Britain just showed up with a frickin' dreadnought called the HMS Dreadnought. Very original. But still, if you thought the ironclad was a career ender for its predecessor, think again. Forget steam-powered paddle boats, this was the age of steam turbines, uniform big gun firepower, and armor plating so thick it added inches to their waistline every year.
The tricky thing with these battleships is that the technology was improving so fast, and the amount of time that was involved in building one of these ships, which is a year, sometimes 2 or 3 years, to build these, is that by the time you finished building it, the technology was already 2 to 3 years old, and in 2 to 3 years, you've made massive improvements in your technology. And so that's what's creating this arms race, is that you've built these ships. Well, now they're already obsolete, and now you need to build new ones. Now you need to build more new ones. And the resources, the steel, the man hours that are involved in building these is just ridiculous.
Sound familiar, you fat as fuck binge-watching twats? Of course, we try to make these videos addictive to watch, but it's still your choice to keep watching and ruin your lives. We are getting a bit off topic here, so let's get back to the arms race. The British HMS Dreadnought made Germany, France, Russia, Japan, Italy, Austria, Hungary, and the United States look like twats as well. So they all started rolling out their own Dreadnought version. A few years later, the first Super Dreadnoughts entered the scene. Arguably the most epic-looking Super Dreadnought was the Japanese Fuso-class battleship, featuring a superstructure called Pagoda Mast, which towered somewhere into the Earth's stratosphere. Maybe they did that because Japanese people are very short, and so they had to compensate for it. Please listen carefully how we used the word compensate to refer to their physical height without mentioning their penis size this time. We do not want to make the same joke over and over again about Japanese people having microscopic-sized genitals. You're welcome.
Anyway, so I mean, there's so many moving parts to this, right? You've got rangefinders, and you've got the size of the guns, and you've got the thickness of the armor, and you've got the types of engines that are being used, and the speed. And eventually then you come up with this idea of battle cruisers, which are faster but thinner. And their idea is that speed is armor, because if you're moving fast enough, as long as you're not hit, it doesn't matter how thick your armor is. And you've got the type of powder that's being used, and the type of explosives that are being used. And there's so many moving parts, and there's so many different ways to build these. And as you're building them, you're not getting opportunities to test them in action. And of course, the Russo-Japanese War becomes one of the first opportunities to see what these dreadnoughts can do in action.
Anyway, during World War I, the British and German navies finally decided to throw down at the Battle of Jutland. The fight was massive, loud, and confusing. And in the end, nobody really won. Yeah.
If you look specifically at the numbers in terms of the damage that's caused and the men that are lost, you could argue that the Germans won a tactical victory on the battlefield, so to speak. But strategically, this was a victory for the British, because the Germans basically said, well, that was so destructive, we don't have the numbers to keep up with the British. We're just going to park our fleet from now on. And they basically kind of abandoned the battlefield, abandoned the seas to the British in terms of surface fleets, and focused primarily on their underwater fleets at that point.
We know, super boring. But Britain had way more ships waiting in the wings, so they basically shrugged, dusted themselves off, and said, cool, we'll just keep ruling the seas anyway.
And one of the men who was at the Battle of Jutland, who was a gunnery officer on the HMS Collingwood, was future King George VI.
After World War I, battleships basically hit the gym, bulking up with better engines, bigger guns, and tougher armor, like they were prepping for round 2.
Right, but in the meantime, you had the London Naval Treaty, which is meant much like, again, seeing the parallels with the arms race, the nuclear arms race that comes later in the century, where you have treaties that are signed to try and kind of scale it back and tell both sides, okay, let's limit what we're doing and not escalate this any further. They try to do the same thing with the Naval Arms Treaty.
The Washington and London naval treaties tried to prevent a round 2 by capping tonnage, displacement, and gun size. The idea? Avoid another economy-molesting arms race like the one that helped tee up World War I,
But even in those even those naval treaties, there were certain things that, like, the British kind of worked in that allowed them to have some advantages over, say, the Germans.
Known as Round 1.
And actually, I should mention, too, that in the aftermath of World War I, one of the things that the Germans had to do was basically surrender their fleet. And one of the only things that got negotiated in the armistice when they were at Campania and they were negotiating for an end to the fighting, basically it was a surrender demand. The French General Foch, he basically hands over to the German negotiators, here's our list of demands, take it or leave it. And one of the few things they were able to negotiate was the Germans were able to say, listen, you're demanding we turn over X number of U-boats. We don't have X number of U-boats. So you need to change this number to reflect the number we actually have. And they end up surrendering a lot of their fleet, and they take a lot of it up to Scapa Flow in Orkney, north of, in the northern part of the British Isles. And there's actually, I think it's 1919, there's kind of a conspiracy where some of the German POWs who are on these ships scuttle the ships rather than allow the British to hold on to them. Some of these guys get executed for doing it.
In theory, it was a noble goal. In practice, well, let's just say some countries treated the rules more like suggestions.
The British.
A few got creative with design loopholes. Others skipped
Italians,
the pretense and said, yeah, we're not doing that. So, to spill the beans, these treaties didn't actually stop the arms race, but it did give us some truly weird and wonderful ships along the way. Take the Nazis, for example, who built a few pocket battleships. Honestly, just hearing the words Nazi pocket battleship in the same sentence is just weird. Swiss pocket knife? Sure. Nazi pocket battleships? What the fuck are you talking about?
So pocket battleships, you could define them as heavy cruisers. I mean, heavy cruisers in the 1930s are bigger and more powerful than battleships 20 or 30 years earlier anyway. So I think Scharnhorst would be an example of pocket battleships.
Oh, and it gets even better. Apparently they had a swastika and eagle slapped on their ass as well. So those are eagle on a swastika tramp-stamped Nazi pocket battleships for you all. Wunderbar.
Wunderbar.
When the worldwide arms race became World War II, everyone was fixated on these state-of-the-art battleships and how they'd dominate the seas.
And all the way back in the 1920s, you have people like in the American Air Corps and in the Navy arguing, listen, aircraft is the future. They saw that in World War I. They saw how aircraft could make a difference. And they were minority voices, but they were arguing even in the 1920s, we need to start developing aircraft carriers. And they're going to be the dominant force. And you had the traditional naval guys saying, no, it's all about the battleships. And of course, we see what ends up being the dominant force in World War II.
But it didn't take long before it became clear that other weapons were changing the game big time.
Yep.
Submarines had been lurking as a threat since World War I. But the real game changer was aircraft, especially those launched from carriers. The attack on Pearl Harbor was the ultimate showdown, proving once and for all that air power was now the true ruler of naval warfare.
Right, and the aircraft carriers that were a part of the Pacific Fleet weren't at Pearl Harbor, and there were those in the Japanese Navy who argued the battleships were the real target. There were others in the Japanese Navy who said, no, we need to go after the aircraft carriers. And we know that they had to have thought that, because how did they launch the strike on Pearl Harbor? They didn't do it with battleships. They did it with aircraft carriers. They understood the importance and the reach of aircraft carriers. So there were definitely those in the Japanese Navy who were very disappointed and very concerned that they didn't catch the American carriers in the port. Fairly certain the Americans didn't have any battleships with four-gun turrets at Pearl Harbor. There were other ships. I think the French had a couple. Jean Bart might have been one of them. There were some pretty unique designs out there.
Due to aerial attacks, the HMS Prince of Wales became the Prince of Fails. The German battleship Bismarck became Germany's Pissmark.
The crazy part about Bismarck is that what eventually, in the end, took it down was kind of a World War I style airplane that was launched from the Ark Royal. It was a biplane. It was an old kind of slow wooden plane, and that actually worked to its advantage because it was so slow that it didn't have the speed, and Bismarck had a harder time hitting the darn thing.
The Japanese battleship Yamato became... oh shit, why does nothing rhyme with Yamato?
Yamato was massive. It was the biggest of the biggest. Bismarck, at the time that it went into service, was the largest battleship afloat and had a sister ship, the Tirpitz. And it was a sister ship. It wasn't a brother ship. I've talked about this before. I'm not going to go into, again, why Bismarck was not he. But anyway.
Tomato, gelato, nah, forget it. This whole joke became a wreck on its own, unfortunately. Let's just call her the world's largest about-to-be artificial coral reef. Throughout the course of World War II, aircraft carriers changed the game.
Yep.
Suddenly, naval battles didn't require ships to even see each other. What used to be up-close and personal brawls became long-distance relationships, with planes doing the dirty work from hundreds of miles away.
And yet, ironically, battleships are going to be used in combat into my lifetime, into the early 1990s. We used battleships during the Persian Gulf War when I was in middle school.
But the biggest battleship brawl was still on the horizon. At the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval
Leyte Gulf
clash in history, American and Japanese battleships finally went head-to-head. In the Surigao Strait, something poetic happened. 4 US battleships, once sunk or damaged at Pearl Harbor and later resurrected, executed the classic crossing the T maneuver.
Yep.
While doing so, they decimated the southern Japanese naval force.
Why does crossing the T matter? Well, if you think about it, that it's a broadside, right? You know, if you're going towards straight at somebody, only your front turrets are able to really fire. If you're going along that side of the T there, all of your guns, your turrets can turn and face and fire. So you can bring a lot more guns down on your enemy.
Maybe the T stands for a chef's kiss, tat for tat, in that case. Leyte Gulf wasn't just massive, it was the last time a battleship took center stage during a war. Did I say that was the last time? Oh no, the real moment came on September 2nd, 1945, when the Americans and Japanese stood face to face once again. This time.
So the USS Missouri today, you can go see it. It's in Pearl Harbor, and it's like right next to the USS Arizona Memorial, the site of that sinking. So you can kind of see the beginning and the end of the war for the United States right there, side by side in Honolulu. But like I said, battleships still used into the 90s.
I'm aboard the USS Missouri. It was there, on her deck, that Japan signed the unconditional surrender of all its forces. And really, what could be more fitting for such a momentous act than beneath the looming shadows from the massive guns of Mighty Mo?
There was another class of battleship that was being worked on. I think it was the Montana class that would have been like the size of the Yamato with like those 17 and 18-inch guns, massive guns. But I think it was the USS Iowa was the one that was used during the Persian Gulf War. And that's more like Missouri. All right, that was good. Nice and succinct, real quick way to just kind of give us a lot to talk about when it comes to battleships. Add to the conversation. Of course, there are great channels out there that focus specifically on that kinds of history. Ones we haven't taken a look at yet, like Drakenfell. At some point, we may do that. But I want to give a shout out and a thank you to Riley Mobley and Alex Dredge, who both are supporters through Patreon. Thank you so much to you and to all of our patrons and members over on YouTube. Could not do this without you. Thanks for watching.